Hi, so recently Lucy and I completed the GR221 in Mallorca. Here are a few tips that might help you in the planning stage. Now all the stages that I mention relate to this Cicerone guidebook. Okay, tip number 1, waymarking on stage number 1. When you get to the top of the mountain and it levels off, there are several paths that you can take. If you don't follow the guidebook carefully, it's very easy to take the wrong path. This is not too much of an issue because they all kind of head in the same direction, but like us, we ended up in the woods and it just made the journey a lot longer than it needed to be. So tip number 1, stage number 1, follow the guidebook carefully because the waymarking at the top of the hill is not as good as it could be. Okay, tip number 2, if you have any concerns about your navigation skills, download an app called All Trails. All Trails and then the route. There are several sections where there is no path and it's very rocky terrain, and the only waymarking are cairns, and the cairns can be very small. Trying to spot these cairns in a rocky environment can be very difficult when the weather's perfect. If the fog and the mist was to roll in, these would be almost impossible to find. By downloading All Trails, you've got an easy and quick reference to check you're on the right path. So tip number 2, make life a little bit easier for yourself, download All Trails. Okay, tip number 3. So Ses Fontanelles is down in the book as having light refreshments. Now the only light refreshments they have is bottled water. It costs €1, you need to have change, and it works on an honesty system. If like us you were expecting maybe some chocolate, some crisps, some snacks, some nuts, something to buy, don't rely on these because they're not available. We were lucky because we'd taken some backup food. So tip number 3, Ses Fontanelles is a water station only. You won't get any food there unless you're stopping in the refuge. Okay, so tip number 4, if you're taking a tent and camping, be aware a lot of the trail is rocky, steep, covered in shrub and bush, and to find the flat spot for the tent for the night, you may have to walk off trail quite a bit or further than you expected. If you are restocking at a town, you may have to walk an hour or maybe more on some stages out of the town to find somewhere secluded to pitch your tent. So tip number 4, if you're going to take a tent, take as small a footprint tent as you can get away with. Try and take a tent that doesn't rely heavily on tent pegs. And the tent pegs that you do take, make sure they are very sturdy and they are strong enough for you to hit with a rock. Okay, so tip number 5, it's not really a tip, but it's handy to know. Mobile phone signal is pretty good. So is internet. You may be thinking, I don't want a phone signal, I don't want the internet. If you're like us, we did very little planning. Having a reasonably good phone signal and internet meant that we could book hostels, hotels, refuges while we were on the stages and we knew how far we did or didn't want to go that day. This just meant planning on the fly a lot easier. So tip number 5, or interesting fact number 5, is phone signal, internet signals, pretty good on the trail. Okay, so tip number 6. This may seem like an obvious one to most people and probably is. Sun cream, sunglasses, sun hat, long sleeve shirt, trousers instead of shorts perhaps. When we went in September, we were expecting the temperatures to be slightly lower and the sun to be perhaps slightly more clouded. We still had several days over 30 degrees. And the sun's not just hitting you from above, but in some sections it's hitting the rock and then bouncing back and hitting you from below. On these stages, there's very little shade, if any. So if you're not careful, you can very easily get burned, you can very easily get sunstroke. So it might seem like an obvious one, but tip number 6, do not forget those items. Okay, tip number 7, some of the descents are very, very, very long. I deliberated whether to take walking poles or not because I don't usually need them. I'm glad I took them. One descent in particular was the descent into Deer. It was probably a 3-hour descent. It was a killer. It may have felt worse because we'd done 2 stages that day and that was the end of the 2nd stage, but it went on and on and on. And the terrain was really rocky, followed by wooded areas where there were plenty of leaves, plenty of twigs, plenty of things for you to roll an ankle on. Taking the walking poles, especially with a heavy backpack, made the world of difference. So tip number 7, even if you're not used to or don't usually use walking poles, consider taking them because they do make life easier. Okay, tip number 8, and again, this might seem like an obvious one, but I'll say it anyway. Take plenty of water. I'm not going to insult people by saying how much water you should take, but there is very, very little opportunity for you to get water once you've started the stage. I'm not saying there aren't opportunities, they are just few and far between. So tip number 8, better to have more water than you need than need more water than you have. Tip number 9, don't miss any opportunities. There are plenty of little alternative routes that you can do. For example, when we were coming close to Sawyer, we had an option whether we could turn left and go to the beach or turn right to go to Sawyer. The route says right and go to Sawyer, but we decided to go to the beach, went for a swim, then we just got the bus to Sawyer and spent the night in Sawyer. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't be blinkered, don't have a plan that you have to stick to, go with the flow. This kind of leads me on to the final tip, tip number 10, do it your way, north to south, south to north. Rush it and try and do it in 5 days, take your time and do it in 2 weeks. While we were on the trail, we met a lady that was doing it over 6 weeks. She was over there for 6 weeks and she was breaking each stage down into smaller stages. She was parking a car where she could, doing a bit of the stage, getting on a bus, going back to the car, having a few days off, doing another bit, go and do half of it, and then go back and do the other half the following year. It's an absolutely great trek because you're never actually that far from any towns and villages. So I guess tip number 10, finally, don't put yourself under pressure. Do it however you want to do it in whatever time you see fit. Okay, so I hope all those things helped you in your planning. Equally, if you were umming and ahhing whether the trek was for you, I hope that's perhaps giving you a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of confidence to perhaps go and do it. Like I said, the link to the guidebook is in the description below, as well as the link for all trails. If you have any questions you want to ask, please comment and ask them, and I'll do my best to answer. If you like this video, please hit subscribe. Please also go onto my YouTube channel to see other videos, including the video of the actual trek. I think our next international trek is a 5-day trek in Iceland, but I know I'll be doing stuff in between. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.